Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we try to predict the future by looking at the past, and oh boy do we have a doozy for you today. It looks like Liberty Star Uranium and Metals Corp is trying to fill us in on what's been going on with their finances, and let's just say it's a bit of a bumpy ride with some interesting developments. So this is a quarterly report from Liberty Star Uranium and Metals Corp. Think of it like a progress update on how the company is doing financially over the last 3 months, ending July 31 of 2025. It's their way of telling us what's happening inside the business, what's working, and what's definitely not. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, you might notice they're listed as a non-accelerated fuller and a smaller reporting company. This basically means they're not a giant corporation with tons of public stock trading around. They're smaller and have fewer regulations to follow, which can sometimes mean less detailed public information, but will make do. Before we get into the numbers, the company always has to put in this big warning. It's like saying, hey, we're going to talk about the future here, but things might change and what we say might not end up being exactly right. It's a standard legal thing they have to do, but it's a good reminder that their future plans are just that, plans, not guarantees. They're essentially talking about all the risks involved in their business, like the possibility of their exploration programs failing or not being able to get enough money to keep going. Alright, let's get to the main event, the financial tables. First up, we have the balance sheets. If you look here at the assets side for July 31, 2025, they have cash and cash equivalents of $2,962 they had at the beginning of the year. That's a positive sign, meaning they've managed to bring in more cash. Now, on the flip side, liabilities. Their accounts payable and accrued liabilities are $181,100 on $48 as of July 31st, 2025. This is down from $229,032 at the start of the year. This sounds good, like they're paying off their bills faster. This is a big one, folks. Their total stockholders deficit at July 31st, 2025 is actually a negative $830. Now that looks scary, but it's actually much better than the negative $1,603 of the $957 they had at the start of the year. So even though they have a deficit, meaning their liabilities are more than their assets, they've managed to reduce that deficit significantly over the last 6 months. Moving on to the statements of operations, this is where we see how they actually made or lost money. For the 3 months that ended July 31st, 2025, they had a net loss of $21,500, they had a net loss of $21,500, had a net loss of $21,000 at Horton on $29,149, $49,149, $49,129, $129,149, $129,199, $409, $49, $45 they oddly had in the same period last year. See this line here, gain on change in fair value of derivative liability. That's a pretty big number that swings things around. In the 3 months ended July 31st, 2025, it was a gain of 119,400 and 22 years. And for the basic earnings per share, that's also showing a loss of $0 for the 3 months ending July 31st, 2025. This mirrors their overall loss for the period. Here in the statements of changes in stockholders' deficit, things get interesting. Look at the stock issuances. For the 6 months ended July 31st, 2025, they issued shares for cash and through private placements, which increased their additional paid-in capital by over $800,000. This is how they are getting that cash we saw in the balance sheet. And they also issued shares when they converted their debt into stock. This is a common way companies manage their debt. They also recorded some stock-based compensation. This is basically like paying employees or consultants with company stock instead of cash. You can see how these transactions affect the accumulated deficit. By issuing more stock and bringing in cash, they are slowly chipping away at that negative number. Now for the cash flow statements. This shows where the money actually came from and where it went. For the 6 months ended July 31st, 2025, they used $45,546 in operating activities. This means their main business operations are costing them more than they are bringing in. But then look at financing activities. They had 60, 38, 613s like issuing stock and getting money from convertible notes. They also got a significant amount from advances from related parties, a total of $75,000 from Peter Heron, who is the chairman of the board. This shows they are relying on external funding and loans to keep themselves afloat. And notice this again, shares were issued for the conversion of debt. This is a key way they are managing their financial obligations. Path Castor Liberty Star Uranium Amp. Metals Corp Kemp Seb. Pinsia Pira Teb. Safter Note Tip PS AC Rude. expense et pi SU expense caus. Dapti SU expense etal et. They also have accrued unpaid vacation days of $5,945 owed to their interim CEO and CFO Patricia Madaris. It's not a huge amount, but it shows the ongoing operational cost. And let's talk about those related party advances again. You can see the prior period balance was $2,000 and $5,000, and they received another $75,000 as cash advances. This indicates a continued reliance on funds from individuals connected to the company. Remember Brett Gross, I mentioned him earlier? Well, it looks like the company had a note payable to him that has now been paid off or converted, as the balance is now zero. They've issued quite a few of these convertible promissory notes. These are essentially loans that can be turned into company stock. For example, the note from March 2025 to 1800 Diagonal Lending LLC had a principal amount of $61,000, $61,000, $61,000, $61,000, $61,000, $61,000. They're using these notes to get cash, but they come with either discounts or fees, and the terms can be pretty complex. This is a really technical part, but important. They have these things called derivative liabilities for their warrants and convertible notes. As of July 31st, 2025, these were valued at $145,400. These are essentially financial contracts whose value changes with the market. A big part of their profit or loss in the income statement comes from how the value of these derivatives changes. And you can see here how these derivative gains and losses affect the net income or loss available to common shareholders. It definitely tells the story of how volatile their financial results can be due to these financial instruments. Now, something very important here under controls and procedures. The company's principal executive and financial officers have concluded that their disclosure controls and procedures were not effective. This means that while they're trying to be transparent, the systems they have in place aren't fully robust. They mentioned that given the size of their current operations and limited staff, segregating duties and implementing formal internal controls is challenging. This is a red flag that suggests potential weaknesses in their internal financial reporting and oversight. This section details how they've been selling stock and other securities without registering them with the SEC, which is allowed for private placements. They've been using these sales to bring in cash, but it's important to understand that this isn't trading on a public stock exchange. They've issued lots of units, which are often a mix of stock and warrants, possibly to raise a bit more capital. They continue to issue these convertible notes even after the July 31st reporting period. For example, they issued another one to Labour's Fund 2 on August 7th, 2025 with similar terms. This shows their ongoing need for financing and their strategy of using these debt instruments. And here's something interesting in the notes to the financial statements. The subscription receivable balance is $100 on both July 31st, 2025 and January 31st, 2025. This refers to money owed to them for stock that has been subscribed but not fully paid for yet, and it hasn't changed. In the management's discussion and analysis, they refer back to their 2025 annual report, which is like saying, go read our last big report for more context. This is typical when they're explaining their current situation. They describe their business as acquiring and exploring mineral properties. They mention their Tombstone Super Project and the Hay Mountain property, where they're looking for copper, gold, and other metals. They also explain their phased exploration plan, which is dependent on getting funding. This quote really sums up their situation. They've done some drilling and some of it shows promise, but they need a lot more money to continue their exploration. Without that funding, their plans just sit on hold. The report shows they had a net loss of $21,712 for the 3 months ending July 31st, 2025. This is a flip-flop from a net income of over $1 million in the same period last year. That huge swing is largely driven by those derivative gains and losses we talked about earlier. So what's my take on Liberty Star Uranium and Metals Corp? Well, the company is clearly in a high-risk exploration phase. They are successfully bringing in new cash through stock issuances and convertible notes, which is great for their liquidity by bringing their cash balance up nicely. However, they are still burning through cash in their operations and heavily reliant on external financing. The significant volatility in their income due to fair value changes in derivative liabilities shows they are playing with some pretty complex financial instruments that can mask the true operational performance. The material weakness in their internal controls is a concern that investors should definitely pay attention to. They have potential in their mineral properties, but the ability to fund and execute their exploration plans is the key uncertainty. Alright, that's our breakdown of Liberty Star's latest filing. What's your take on these numbers and what they signal for the company's future? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps, and subscribe for more deep dives. Don't forget to check out the Discord link in the description below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.